Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the latest episode of the Digital Adoption Show, where we host the top L&D, HR, and tech luminaries to discuss what's next in the future of work and technology. I'm your host, Deepika, Senior Field Marketing Manager at Whatfix. And today, we have a fascinating discussion in store for you about why building a community for learning could be the next best thing for L&D. To discuss this, we have an exemplary guest with us today whose career in learning development has spanned over 2 decades. Jane Bozarth, Director of Research at the Learning Guild. Jane isn't just a researcher, though. She's a prolific author who's written bestsellers like Social Media for Trainers, Better Than Bullet Points, Creating Engaging E-Learning with PowerPoint, and From Analysis to Evaluation, Tools, Tips, and Techniques for Trainers. These books have helped countless trainers ditch boring slides and create truly engaging learning experience. She's also been an instructor at InSync Training for over 24 years. Before joining the Learning Guild, she was an e-learning coordinator for the state of North Carolina. With a career that exemplifies dedication to L&D, she has been the forefront of leveraging technology to enhance training and development programs. Welcome to our podcast, Jane.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here today.
Before we start our discussion, we would like to know you better. Why don't you tell us a bit about yourself? And also, you recently reissued your 2008 book, From Analysis to Evaluation. What inspired you to revisit this?
I am Jane Bozarth. I am in Durham, North Carolina. It's the home of Duke University near my alma mater, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I began my whole training and development and design career was spent in North Carolina state government. I started as a classroom trainer, a stand-up platform trainer. We didn't have dedicated instructional designers. We sort of did everything. So I learned design along the way. So I was a stand-up trainer, and then I saw that e-learning could solve a lot of our problems with geography and having to have learners travel and having to deliver a lot of compliance things. And so I became interested in designing and developing e-learning. I took on the first role as the e-learning coordinator for the state. I was the only one really interested in it then, and so that was me. They made the job for me. And then as time went on, I got more interested in things like social learning and how that could solve some of our problems. And so I moved into the social media, social learning side of things. And then when I left that job 7 years ago, the Learning Guild Patty Shank had just left that job and it was open, and so I stepped into that, and I've been doing research reports for them since January 2018. I do a report a month on many topics. I write most of them, but sometimes we have guests like Will Thalheimer or Carla Torgerson or Vince Hahn, people like that. Catherine Lombardozzi's working on one for us now on leadership. And we release those once a month and they're free. So I encourage folks to take a look at learningguild.com to see about that. About the book, I don't know if you heard, but we had COVID here for a little while. I had done an edited compilation of tools that trainer practitioners said they really used in their work, things they had developed, things like instructor guide templates, things like checklists for needs analysis, things like tips for what to do if you're doing training on the road, all kinds of stuff that people had put together. And it was a big book and it was expensive and it went out of print. And suddenly during COVID, we had all of these teachers saying that they wanted to leave the classroom and get into what everybody was calling corporate training. I don't exactly know what that meant. Corporate training or corporate instructional design. And, I said, well, I wrote that. I have that. Because here's the thing, a teacher, if they need to learn storyline or they need to learn Camtasia, they can do that. That's a thing. This book had been fairly tech agnostic. The content was still very evergreen, and it covered a lot of the things those teachers didn't have experience in, like trying to negotiate with stakeholders, what to do if somebody came to you sort of demanding a workshop that you knew wasn't going to fix a problem, that it wasn't a training problem. So this book helped with that side of things. The publisher was not terribly interested in reissuing it just in a digital version because I said, I called them up. I said, I could have this ready to go in just a few weeks. There's not much I need to edit. And so they gave me the rights back. And now InSync Training stepped in and they have reissued it. And I need to be very clear, it's a reissue. I didn't rewrite the book. We made a few tweaks. For instance, we cut out learning styles, any reference to that, because 15 years ago, we thought we knew about that. And now we know better. So the book has been reissued. It's available from InSync Training. I believe it's going to be on Amazon this week, and it's called From Analysis to Evaluation, tools, tips, and techniques for trainers. So, and it's much cheaper than it was in the paper version. So I hope that folks will take advantage of that. And I need to say this, if you have a paper copy, you need to get in touch with me because we owe you a digital version. We promised that way back when, and it was never created. So you're entitled to a free one. So get in touch with me after the show, and I will see what I can do about getting that.
Let's now move on to the real bit of the podcast, right? The serious bit. So let's get started on that. You work for one of the major learning communities across the world. Can you share with our audience what is the vision behind building and driving the Learning Guild, or for that matter, any community?
In this case, I will say the Learning Guild occupies its own niche. I mean, we have several learning and development communities, as you know, and you kind of already referenced that. The Learning Guild emerged and was created specifically to help our members navigate the intersection of technology and learning. So it was originally the e-learning guild. People may remember that, but that was the goal. It was not about being a stand-up trainer. It was not about designing and developing handouts. It was about what was then called e-learning, but now that's kind of ubiquitous. So it's helping people look and see where those spaces intersect, trying to stay current with new technologies, trying to see what the learning applications might be of those, trying to find experts who can speak to those things as they are emerging and that kind of thing.
Okay, awesome. So scaling a community is the most difficult part of a community management. Can you share some ideas to do this efficiently?
The first thing I want to say is what are you scaling and why, and how big do you envision this? Because I think we run into trouble thinking everybody in the world needs to belong to our community. I think sure, marketing would love that because they're selling product, right? I don't know that an L&D community needs the whole world in it. So I think my first thing is when you're trying to get started, people want everything for everyone in their community, and I don't think that's realistic. And we're going to you have a question coming up that I can address that better, I think. So I think first of all, what is it you're trying to do? Why do you want this community? Who is in this community? Are you wanting specifically, if you're selling a software like an authoring tool, do you want people who have already bought it? Do you want to have to contend with people you're trying to sell to? Do you want just brand new users to get them started the first 6 months? Do you want experience? And you need to think about what you're doing because I think community is a very nice, warm, fuzzy word, and we don't specify it very well. We get into trouble with vanity metrics, with saying, oh, we have 8,000 members, we have 27,000 members, and you may see that, yeah, and 40 of them are active. So to give some thought to that. But I think when you're trying to scale it, maybe think about what I just said. Do you need pocket or spaces or something that differentiates the different kinds of users you have? You know, I would call myself a power user of PowerPoint up to the last 6 years or so. I haven't, those scales have kind of declined on me because I don't need them as much. I don't need 75 people again asking every day, how do I get started and what is the ribbon for, right? I'm going to be bored with that. And I'm going to get tired of always having to scroll through those conversations to find things useful for me. So you might need an intermediate group, or I might want to be in a more advanced group. That doesn't mean it needs to be a different community somewhere else. It just means maybe you need to differentiate it. I would look at, so who is it for? What are you trying to do? You know, one of the challenges we have, and again, I don't mean to be tangling up with other questions, but you know, if you're working with people who've already bought the product, they don't need you to be selling the product, right? They're looking for something else from that, more use of it, how to expand it. Maybe you've got add-ons, maybe there's more skills they could build. So when you're trying to scale it, I would also look for where you can get some new blood from time to time. I run into this with some face-to-face groups I belong to, where we just all kind of get bored with each other. How can we bring in some new people? What would appeal to them? Should we have people invite a friend? Should we have some guest speakers? My husband's in a situation right now with a community where they're all scrambling to learn about their health insurance, and they're all talking to each other and no one knows anything. And so they really need to find somebody to come and speak from outside that community to in, right? Am I making sense? And that would attract some new members. So I think there's a number of ways to scale it and things you could do to build it out. But I also would invite people to be judicious about that. The fact that you have 10,000 members doesn't make it a great community. The fact that a YouTube video has 10,000 views doesn't mean it's a great video. It might be the oldest video. It might be the one that had advertising dollars behind it, right? So, look and see what you're really trying to do and then target the scaling in a way that makes sense.
Fair enough. So, but how do you think user driven communities perform better than like company driven ones?
I saw this question. I don't think I'm the right person to answer that. Again, I think it's what you're trying to do, but I will say this. A whole lot in that question depends on what resources are available. If you have a company supported community and they are giving you paid community managers or people who are given time during the day to be the community managers, if you are being given support to develop content for the community or hire the speaker I just mentioned, I mean, if you have those kind of resources, I think a community supported, I mean, a company supported community is great. I have, however, seen people, the company had this and then it's like, oh, Jane, and then go do this too. And then you've got a community manager who's just going to see this as just one more work thing they have to do. They may not have asked for it. They didn't apply for it, right? So I think it depends. My dissertation was about a community of practice I belonged to that was entirely member run, entirely member driven, entirely member focused. There was some people in it had trouble even getting time to attend the meetings. They got that little support for it. And it was very, very effective, but it was also face to face. I mean, we drove somewhere and had meetings back then, back in the olden days. And I have seen those be very successful, but you run the risk in both these cases, actually, of the people who are in charge of it or the people mostly staffing it getting burnt out over time. When the company is there, somebody can watch that and maybe work to get somebody else in place. When you're dealing with volunteers, they're volunteers, right? You can only expect so much. You can't expect them to drop everything from their own jobs and their personal lives to deal with stuff. So it's a pretty big commitment to ask either way. So I'm sorry I'm not giving you a very good answer, but I do think it depends. It also, I think, depends on the size. I was in a community with 300 people. We could be talking about a community with 25,000 people, and you'd almost certainly have to have company or community, some kind of support for that, I would think.
Yeah, so definitely there are some challenges and advantages to this as well.
Resources is always going to be a challenge, and especially I think if there's not a company behind it. But having said that, we have all dealt with companies who have great ideas and they don't really want to give any, much support or many resources for it. I mean, I've dealt for years with people who wanted really elaborate training programs or e-learning solutions, and they wanted it to be like free, right? Well, we need video, but we aren't going to buy you a camera. It's.
So, how do you effectively measure the ROI of the community to know if it's actually performing and meeting the goals that you have actually set for it?
Interesting bit I have written about from Etienne Wenger. He wrote a really nice white paper, and there's a framework for assessing the value of online interactions. Now, his was more to the individual performer level, but I think what he wrote about holds true. And he did it with his wife, Beverly Trainer, and someone named Delot. And it's available. If you want it, I can send that to you. But I've written about it. It's been published in Learning Guild. I wrote it for a column. You could look it up. It's assessing the value of online interactions. But the framework basically it looks at, first of all, are people joining? That's your first measure is this attracting people? Are they joining? And then it's like, are they participating? Now, participating means are they engaging at all with each other? Not just that they're lurking and hanging around and that you got 8,000 members, only 8 of them ever posted anything, right? So you're looking at whether they are engaging, whether they're engaging with each other. Sometimes people just spam the whole world. What are you doing about this? What do you think about that? And then they get 20 answers and they never talk back. You with me? So it's very static. There's no give and take. There's no back and forth. So are you seeing members engage with each other? Are you seeing people interact with each other? As a community develops, you start seeing that people develop understanding and awareness of each other. For instance, they'll say, well, Jane wrote a book about PowerPoint, or Tracy has been working a whole lot with Photoshop, or, well, Margie is great with coming up with a scenario. When you start seeing things like that, that's an indication that the community is working, that people are engaging. So then that's all great. And I need to say, first of all, the reason people participate in a community is because it's fun or they get value out of it. You can't force somebody You can
And
make them join and maybe you can count their number of posts, but you can't make somebody want to form relationships. You have to figure out what it is they really are trying to get from this community. And sometimes, honestly, I go in and get an answer and I get out. That's really all I need. I don't need to be friends with everybody, right? So beyond those basics of, are people joining, are people engaging, do they seem to be enjoying it, are they talking to each other, are you seeing relationships evolve? Then when you start looking at that ROI, are they creating or reusing artifacts? Is the community developing tips and guidelines and practices that they're sharing with each other? Is somebody printing those out? Is somebody compiling them somewhere? Is there a separate place you could just search for worksheets or instructor guides, or I don't know, version 19, whatever you're working on? Are you seeing reuse of material? Are people using things the community is developing without everybody replicating everything all the time, right? And then are you seeing them put those into practice? Do people come back and say, I tried this at work and it worked. I did this thing and it saved money. I told my bosses about this and they want us to move forward. Are you starting to see those kind of results? Now, the simplest thing is, if you're selling something, again, if you're selling software or something, you can tie sales to all of this. But if you're looking for less tangible measures, those are the kinds of things you're looking for. Is there at some point, are you seeing any kind of organizational outcome? Are you seeing an impact? Are people saying that they're changing their practices? Are people saying that they're putting something big into practice and it's affecting organization wide?
so within the community itself, there could be multiple roles, responsibilities for different people of the community, right? So different aspects of the community as well. What are some of the roles and skills required to ace these roles?
At the risk of getting myself in trouble, because numbers always get people in trouble, I will say I tend to remember back to something we used to call the 99-1 rule, which means that for every 100 members in a community, you have 9 who are very active. You see them a lot, they post a lot, they answer a lot, that sort of thing. And you often have one that's sort of leading things, that changes the subject, that asks a question, that redirects, that notices the behavior. So there are a number of roles that are involved in that. You do need somebody needs to be in charge of something. Somebody needs to help control the wild, wild west of it. If people are posting lots of incorrect information is a challenge when you're talking about technology. If they're talking about, they're just giving bad advice, or there are problems if fights break out. Somebody somewhere has to decide at what point you step in, or at what point you calm things down, or turn a discussion off, or stop commenting. Somebody somewhere needs to be in that role. And I think that's a careful decision you need to make, because I'm very quick. I'll get tired of stuff, I'll just shut it down, and I'm probably too quick about it. I don't think that would be a good role for me. But learning, when temperatures are running hot, learning when misinformation is getting to be a problem, is a skill I think you need to develop. And I'm afraid it's very situational and it's really specific to a community. I mean, I have seen software engineers, almost come to blows, and they're all best friends and go out and have a beer after. You have to know who you're working with, right? You need to have somebody, I think, for lack of a better word, who's sort of the secretary, who can remember, oh, wait, we talked about that before. Or, oh, wait, we went over that once. Or, oh, wait, I saved that. Or have a place that I saved that. Somebody sort of kind of needs to manage the content in a way. And it may be architecture. It may just be setting up forums or setting up areas that make sense. But somebody kind of needs to know about that. You need to have someone who is good at communicating. This is infinitely more difficult in the age of so many different social tools, to say we're going to have a live stream on Tuesday at 2 and it needs to go out everywhere. And then somebody in Australia says that's the middle of the night. And then and then somebody one time, we used to do some book clubs via Twitter, and they were typically very well received. They were very successful. But invariably, we would find out that we'd chosen a book that was not brand new, but reasonably new, and it wasn't available online in Australia yet. Amazon didn't have it in Bangalore yet. It was really frustrating. So trying to communicate, make sure everybody could get the same information, making sure there was consistent messaging and that somebody else wasn't going behind complicating it or getting the time wrong. It always happens. So you need a communicator. You also people who are sort of the relationship, the community relationship, the maintenance people. I mean, if you think about work, generally there's somebody who remembers birthdays, somebody who remembers there's a baby, somebody who remembers that we have a friend in one of our biggest communities I belong to who has just come through breast cancer treatment. And it is you can tell the community is very interested in this. They're very concerned about it. It's a big community. It's not 12 people. It's a big community, very worried because she has been a big contributor. So, people who can keep an eye on all of those things. And I think it's different roles, particularly as a community grows.
All right, Jane, my final question to you today for our audience. Any final advice for growing learning communities and engaging the community?
You need to talk about what they want to talk about. Very often, a community is developed with a specific topic or a goal in mind, or management has a very specific topic or goal in mind. And I remember years ago, I had a coworker who worked in the HR area, colleague more than a coworker, who was determined he needed a custom discussion forum built back when that was a thing that was complicated to do, right? We didn't have what we have now. And he was determined that thousands of workers were going to want to come talk about the sexual harassment policy day in and day out. No one cares until the day they have a grievance. Nobody cares, and they'd already had to sit through the training, right? So, forcing your idea and forcing your opinion. So listen to your community people. Listen to what they say they need. Listen to what they say they want to talk about. Listen to the things that keep coming up that are problems for them, that they have questions about, that they are struggling with. Even if it's been, like I said, if the same thing comes up 100 times, that's your sign that we need to do something somewhere about that to help them, right? And we need maybe to have a place for them to talk. So paying attention to what they're saying, paying attention to what they're hearing. And I would say the other thing that I think is critical, and I see this as a problem, we haven't talked about it yet, but I see there's a problem. You need to participate in your community. Too many people have this, if I build it, they will come. Like my guy with the sexual harassment discussion forum, he didn't have anything to add, right? You need to participate. You need to start questions. You need to respond to people. You need to make sure they know your name. You need to make sure they kind of know your shtick, what you're good at, what you're interested in, what they can count on you for or not. And that's fine. But I see too many people who are like, well, I built it and now nobody's talking. Well, then it's your job to figure out what they want to talk about. Ask the questions. Look for the people who are good participants and see if you can recruit them and say, I need some expert advisors. I need community mentors. I need people we can recognize as our star contributor, right? And reward those behaviors when you see them. But I can't say enough. None of it's going to work if you don't participate.
Yeah, I get it. So, networking is also a key, I believe, right, in most of these communities. So, this discussion has definitely been interesting, very enriching, Jane. Who knew the nitty gritty of building and growing a community to success, right? So, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast today and sharing your insights. To all our listeners, stay tuned for more content like this featuring incredible thought leaders like Jane. We are available on all major podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Whether you're at home or on the go, our podcast is a gateway to learning about the latest trends in L&D, HR, and tech. I'm your host, Deepika, signing off.